Today we will discuss pericardium and heart today. So, when you talk about pericardium is the sac that covers or surrounds the heart. When the heart develops, it is like in the form of a tube, and this is called as the heart tube. And is this heart tube has various structures, or you can say that it has various parts. So, it has basically two parts. One part is called as the venous end, you can say. This distal part is called as the venous end, whereas the proximal part or the upper part is called as the arterial end. So there's a venous end, there's an arterial end of the heart, and this heart tube enters into a serous sac, fibrous serous sac, which is called as the pericardium. The sac in which it enters, this is called as the serous pericardium. Now when it enters inside this layer of the pericardium will be called as the visceral pericardium, and what happens is a part of it gets reflected while the heart is entering into this sac. So the part of the serous pericardium, it reflected back onto itself, and this one is called as the parietal layer of the serous pericardium. So the pericardium is a layer which is covering the heart, and the part and that particular pericardium is called as a serous pericardium. And when the heart tube enters into the pericardium, that part which is just adjacent, that lies adjacent to the heart, that will be called as the visceral pericardium, visceral layer of the serous pericardium, and that will surround the heart from all sides. Whereas one portion of this serous pericardium will get reflected onto itself, and that will be called as the parietal part of the serous pericardium, and this will lie under another layer of pericardium which is called as the fibrous pericardium. Now the difference between the name is, the fibrous pericardium is basically meant for supporting the heart into the mediastinum, whereas serous pericardium, this is meant for secreting a very important fluid which is called as the pericardial fluid. And this is the same, and it is lined by the mesothelium. You understand what the mesothelium is? It is just like the endothelium or the epithelium, which is lining the peritoneal cavity of the abdomen. It is just like that, or the pleural cavity. Pericardial cavity, pleural cavity, and the abdominal cavity or the peritoneal cavity. These are the serous cavities, or you can say they are surrounded by the serous mesothelium. They secrete fluid, and why the fluid is present into the potential space which is surrounded by these two layers. In the heart cavity, this is called as the pericardial fluid. In the lung cavity, this is called as the pleural fluid. In the peritoneal cavity or the abdominal cavity, is called as the peritoneal fluid, and they are surrounded, and this fluid is present into their respective cavities. Now here, when you see, this is the visceral layer, this is the parietal layer, and this space over here, this is called as the pericardial cavity, right? Now the sinuses that you were talking about, these sinuses are the potential spaces which are contained between the heart structures. These are called as the sinuses of the pericardium. Why they are important? They are important in few surgical processes. Otherwise, these are just structural features. What are the surgical processes? In some surgeries of the heart, you have to stop the blood flow of the heart, and in that particular case, your transverse the transverse sinus of the pericardium, that is important. I will explain it further. So here I have explained to you that what is the pericardial cavity, what are these two layers, the serous pericardium, and what about the fibrous pericardium. So keep in mind that the serous pericardium, that will secrete the serous fluid or the pericardial fluid, whereas the fibrous pericardium, that will support the structure, support the heart within the mediastinum. Minded that the mediastinum is the space that is contained between the two lungs. The lungs will be here, and the mediastinum is the space which is present in the center. excluding the lungs. So the fibrous pericardium will be supporting the heart within the mediastinum. For instance, in front it will be supporting it against the sternum. Here it will be forming the ligaments which are called as the superior and inferior sternopericardial ligaments, whereas posteriorly it will be supporting the heart against the trachea, the principal bronchi and the esophagus, and the descending thoracic aorta. And on the sides it will be related to the mediastinal pleura. The fibrous pericardium will be related, and at the base, this one will be the base of the heart, and at the base of the heart the fibrous pericardium will merge with the central tendon of the diaphragm. What is the central tendon of the diaphragm? I will explain further in another video. So for now, let's see what are the sinuses basically. So now you know that the heart has two ends, the arterial end and the venous end. Now what happens is, when the heart develops, these structures, these expansions, they grow, and when they grow, the major thing that happens is that this distal portion of the heart, or the venous portion of the heart, goes up and dorsally to the arterial end. And what happens with the situation that we get is some kind of like this kind of situation is the situation that we get. Right, they grow bigger, and this distal end, it goes up. Now I will tell you what are these distal ends. The venous end go dorsally and upwards to the arterial end. The arterial end stays in front. So you can say that in the venous end you have the sinus venosus. Above it is the atrium, above it is the ventricle, and above it is the bulbus caudes, and above it is the truncus arteriosus. This is the truncus arteriosus. The truncus arteriosus and the bulbus caudes, it stays in front, whereas the ventricle, it also stays in front, a portion of it goes behind, whereas the atria and the sinus venosus, they go completely dorsally and above. Now you can understand how the structures they are developed. So what happens is, when the folding of the heart tube is happening, then few spaces of the pericardium, because the pericardium is also surrounding the heart, it gets invested between or it gets trapped, or it gets lodged in between the few structures of the heart. If you can see it over here, that this portion that you see over here, these are the two outlets. This is the aorta and the pulmonary trunk, right? These are the outlets of the heart, or you can say this was the arterial end of the heart, and dorsal to it, these are the pulmonary veins. In the pulmonary veins, they are opening into the left atrium. So you can say that this was the venous end of the heart. Now what is the point is that the space within the pericardium, which is present between the arterial and the venous end of the heart transversely, is called as the transverse sinus of the pericardium, whereas in here you can see the space which is present behind the left atrium, or which is present behind the venous end of the heart, is called as this oblique sinus. It is nothing very complicated. It is just the space of the pericardial cavity which is present behind the left atrium and the pulmonary veins. It is present just behind it, right? So this was about the sinuses and pericardium. I hope you understand it well.